Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington stared at the police chief, squirming in his seat. The room fell silent as Pentagon officials displayed body camera footage of her handcuffed against a patrol car. Nobody knew she had activated her military emergency beacon during the arrest. Everything was about to change. Before we dive into this shocking story of power, racism, and justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who stand against injustice. Now let's rewind to see how a decorated 3-star general ended up in handcuffs and how her single phone call shattered careers. Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington navigated her silver Lexus through the familiar streets of Charleston, South Carolina. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the historic buildings as she drove through the predominantly black neighborhood where she had grown up. After 30 years of distinguished military service, 3 stars on her shoulder, and command over thousands of troops, she still felt a special comfort returning to these streets. Her visit today had been a somber one, checking on her ailing mother, whose health had been declining rapidly over the past months. She had taken 3 days of personal leave, rare in her position as one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military. She wore civilian clothes today, a simple blouse and slacks, her military ID, tucked into her wallet alongside her driver's license. Gabrielle came to a complete stop at the intersection of Maple and Jefferson, carefully checking both ways before proceeding. The flashing lights in her rearview mirror caught her by surprise. She hadn't been speeding, her registration was current, and the car was in perfect order. With the practiced calm that had carried her through combat zones and Pentagon power struggles, she pulled over, turned off the engine, and placed her hands visibly on the steering wheel. A habit born from a lifetime of awareness about the dangers black drivers faced in traffic stops. 2 white officers approached, one on each side of her vehicle. The taller one, whose nameplate identified him as Officer Ryan Bennett, rapped sharply on her window with his knuckles, his other hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. The second officer, Sergeant James Caldwell, positioned himself at the passenger window, mirroring his partner's stance. "License and registration," Bennett demanded without preamble, his tone clipped and hostile. There was no greeting, no explanation for the stop, just the abrupt command. Gabrielle responded with practiced politeness. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" She kept her voice level, non-confrontational. Bennett's face hardened. "I said license and registration. Now." The emphasis on the last word carried an unmistakable threat. Gabrielle nodded, still maintaining her composure. "I'm going to reach for my purse to get my license. It's on the passenger seat." She narrated her movements carefully, knowing the potentially deadly consequences of unexpected motions. She retrieved her license and registration, handing them through the window. "I noticed you have a military ID in there," Bennett said, examining her license. "You in the service?" His tone suggested skepticism. "Yes, sir, I am," Gabrielle answered simply, not volunteering her rank. Years of experience had taught her that revealing her high position often created more problems than it solved in these situations. Bennett smirked, glancing at his partner. "Another affirmative action hire, probably pushing papers somewhere." The comment was deliberately loud enough for her to hear. Caldwell chuckled from the passenger side. "Bet she couldn't pass the physical requirements if she tried." Gabrielle felt the familiar burn of indignation, but kept her expression neutral. She had faced this kind of prejudice throughout her career, from basic training to the Pentagon. "May I ask again why I was pulled over, Officer Bennett?" she repeated calmly. Bennett's expression darkened. "You ran the stop sign back at Maple and Jefferson." Gabrielle shook her head slightly. "Sir, I came to a complete stop at that intersection. I'm very careful about traffic laws." Her polite contradiction seemed to trigger something in Bennett. His posture stiffened and his hand moved closer to his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The word "ma'am" came out as a sneer. "Is that really necessary? I've provided my identification and—" Gabrielle began, but Bennett cut her off. "I said step out of the vehicle. I smell something suspicious. We need to search the car." Gabrielle knew there was nothing to smell, no cause for a search, but she also knew the danger of resistance. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "I do not consent to a search of my vehicle, but I will comply with your order to exit." She stepped out slowly, maintaining her dignity despite the rising tension. As soon as she was clear of the door, Bennett grabbed her arm and roughly pushed her against the side of the car. "Hands on the vehicle, feet back," he barked. Caldwell moved around to assist his hand also on his weapon. "What is the meaning of this?" Gabrielle asked, her voice still controlled, but firmer now. "I've complied with all your instructions. There is no need for physical contact." Bennett leaned in close, his breath hot on her neck. "Another angry black woman who thinks she's special. You people never learn, do you?" The naked racism in his statement stunned Gabrielle momentarily. Before she could respond, she felt cold metal against her wrists as handcuffs were snapped into place. "This is completely unnecessary," so she stated, her military authority beginning to edge into her voice. "I am Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington, Deputy Commander of Strategic Command, and you are making a serious mistake." Both officers laughed derisively. "Yeah, and I'm the Secretary of Defense," Caldwell mocked. "Should we salute you, General?" Bennett added with exaggerated sarcasm. "I want to make a phone call. It's my right," Gabrielle stated firmly. "As a military officer, I have additional protections under federal law that you are currently violating." This only provoked more laughter from the officers. "You'll get your phone call at the station like everyone else," Bennett said dismissively, "after we process you for resisting arrest and whatever else we find." While Gabrielle remained handcuffed against the car, Caldwell began searching her vehicle without consent. The search was thorough and deliberately destructive, with Caldwell pulling items from her glove compartment and tossing them carelessly onto the seats. When he reached the trunk, he found her garment bag containing her formal military uniform, complete with the 3 stars of a lieutenant general clearly visible on the shoulder boards. Caldwell paused, holding up the uniform. "Hey, Bennett, look at this. She's got some kind of costume back here." Bennett glanced over his expression, flickering briefly with uncertainty before hardening again. "Probably stolen, or one of those fake uniforms they sell at surplus stores." He turned back to Gabrielle. "Where'd you get this, huh? Impersonating a military officer is a federal offense." Gabrielle looked him directly in the eye, her patience wearing thin. "That is my uniform, Officer Bennett. As I told you, I am Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington. You can verify my identity with the Pentagon or Joint Base Charleston." Bennett scoffed, though a hint of doubt had crept into his expression. "Get her in the car," he ordered Caldwell. "We'll sort this out at the station." As they maneuvered her toward the patrol car, Gabrielle subtly pressed a recessed button on her watch, activating an emergency beacon that transmitted her GPS coordinates directly to Pentagon security. The small device, issued to all high-ranking military officials for emergencies, would alert her chain of command immediately. Neither officer noticed the tiny light that blinked briefly on her watch face, signaling that her distress call had been sent. As the patrol car door closed behind her, Gabrielle sat straight-backed in the uncomfortable seat, her handcuffed wrists painful, but her expression resolute. The officers had no idea what they had just set in motion. In the Pentagon's secure command center, a monitor flashed red, drawing the immediate attention of Duty Officer Major General Victor Torres. The emergency alert system showed a high-priority distress signal originating from Charleston, South Carolina. Torres leaned forward, his expression changing from routine vigilance to concern as he recognized the ID code. "That's Lieutenant General Washington's beacon," he announced to the room, triggering an immediate flurry of activity. As Deputy Commander of Strategic Command, Gabrielle Washington was responsible for overseeing America's nuclear deterrence and global strike capabilities. Any threat to her was automatically treated as a potential national security incident. Torres immediately initiated the response protocol, dispatching alerts to the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Get me satellite coverage of that location and contact local military assets," Torres ordered. "I want Joint Base Charleston notified immediately." Within minutes, high-resolution satellite imagery focused on the coordinates transmitted by Washington's beacon, showing a police cruiser parked behind a silver Lexus on a residential street. The images were clear enough to show a handcuffed individual in the back seat of the police car. "What the hell is going on?" Torres muttered. Meanwhile, in the back of the patrol car, Gabrielle maintained her composure, as Officers Bennett and Caldwell sat in the front seat discussing what charges they might bring against her. "Disorderly conduct resisting arrest, and I bet we could make a case for impersonating a military officer with that fake uniform," Bennett suggested, unaware that the patrol car's dashboard camera was recording their conversation. "Maybe possession, too, if we find something during the search," Caldwell added with a chuckle. "We need to teach these people they can't just drive through nice neighborhoods without consequences." Gabrielle cleared her throat from the back seat. "Officers, I want to be very clear about something," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. "I am Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington, the second highest-ranking officer in the United States Strategic Command. What you are doing right now constitutes false arrest violation of my civil rights and potentially interferes with national security. I strongly suggest you contact your superiors immediately." Bennett turned in his seat, his face twisted with contempt. "Lady, I don't care if you think you're the Queen of England. You're just another troublemaker, as far as I'm concerned." He turned back to Caldwell. "These delusions of grandeur, man. It's always the same with them." Back at the Pentagon, Torres had established a secure line to Colonel Marcus Jenkins, the commander of Joint Base Charleston. "Colonel, we have a situation," Torres explained urgently. "Lieutenant General Washington has activated her emergency beacon at these coordinates in Charleston. Satellite imagery suggests she's in police custody. I need you to assemble a response team immediately." Jenkins didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. I'll dispatch security forces now. ETA 15 minutes to those coordinates." While Jenkins mobilized his team, Torres directed Pentagon officials to contact the Charleston Police Department. The call was routed to a desk sergeant who responded with immediate skepticism. "A lieutenant general, a black woman, look, we get prank calls all the time. I'm going to need more than that." The Pentagon official escalated the situation, connecting the Secretary of Defense directly to Charleston's mayor and police commissioner. The police commissioner, initially dismissive, quickly changed his tone when the Secretary of Defense identified himself. "This is a matter of national security, Commissioner," the Secretary stated firmly. "Lieutenant General Washington is a 3-star general with access to classified information at the highest levels. We need this situation resolved immediately." The commissioner hurriedly checked Washington's name in their system, the color draining from his face as her military record appeared on his screen. "I'll handle this personally, Mr. Secretary," he assured immediately, trying to contact the officers who had Washington in custody. Bennett and Caldwell, however, had silenced their radios, claiming technical difficulties as they transported their prisoner to the station. Their patrol car's onboard computer displayed multiple urgent messages from headquarters which they deliberately ignored. "Probably just the shift change notices," Bennett commented dismissively. "We'll check in after we process this one." As they approached the station, Gabrielle sat silently in the back seat, mentally reviewing military protocols and regulations. She knew that by now her emergency signal would have triggered a significant response. The officers' continued disregard for her identity would only compound their eventual reckoning. At Joint Base Charleston, Colonel Jenkins had assembled a rapid response team consisting of military police and a JAG officer. 2 Black Hawk helicopters were being prepared on the landing pad, their rotors already beginning to turn. "Our priority is the safe retrieval of Lieutenant General Washington," Jenkins briefed his team. "This is not a combat mission, but a high-profile extraction. We will coordinate with local authorities if possible, but the general's safety comes first." As the helicopters lifted off from the base, their distinctive sound cutting through the early evening air, Bennett and Caldwell arrived at the police station, still oblivious to the storm they had created. They roughly extracted Gabrielle from the back seat, the handcuffs digging painfully into her wrists as they led her inside. Neither officer noticed the police commissioner's car speeding into the parking lot behind them, or the flashing lights of additional police vehicles converging on the station from all directions. The web of consequences for their actions was tightening around them with every passing minute. The fluorescent lights of the Charleston police station buzzed overhead as officers Bennett and Caldwell led a handcuffed Lieutenant General Washington through the booking area. The desk sergeant looked up, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of a well-dressed black woman in handcuffs being manhandled by the 2 officers. "What do we have here?" he asked, reaching for the booking forms. "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and possible impersonation of a military officer." Bennett recited, shoving Gabrielle forward. "Claims she's some big-shot general." The desk sergeant frowned, looking more closely at Gabrielle, who maintained her dignified posture despite the handcuffs. "You sure about this, Bennett? We've been getting some calls about—" he began, but Caldwell cut him off. "Just process her, Malone. We don't have all night." Gabrielle spoke up, her voice calm and authoritative. "Sergeant Malone, I am Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington, Deputy Commander of United States Strategic Command. These officers have unlawfully detained me, searched my vehicle without consent, and ignored my rights. I suggest you contact your superiors immediately." Malone hesitated, his hand hovering over the phone. Bennett let out an exaggerated sigh. "They all have stories, Malone. Just do the paperwork." He pushed Gabrielle toward the fingerprinting station. At that moment, Station Captain Richard Morgan's office phone rang for the 5th consecutive time. Annoyed at the interruption, he finally answered. "Morgan here." The voice on the other end belonged to the police commissioner himself, something that had never happened in Morgan's 15 years at the station. "Captain, listen carefully." The commissioner said, his voice tense. "Do you have a black woman in custody brought in by officers Bennett and Caldwell?" Morgan squinted through his office blinds at the booking area. "Looks like they just brought someone in, yes, sir." "That woman is Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington of the United States Army. She is the second in command of our entire nuclear arsenal. The Secretary of Defense is on the other line, and there are military helicopters en route to your station as we speak. Release her immediately and place those officers under suspension. This is coming directly from the mayor's office." Morgan's face drained of color as the implications dawned on him. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." He slammed down the phone and bolted from his office, nearly colliding with another officer in his haste. In the booking area, Bennett was becoming increasingly rough with Gabrielle, forcing her hand onto the fingerprint scanner despite her controlled resistance. "You're just making this harder on yourself, he growled. "Sir," Morgan's voice cracked like a whip across the room, "release that woman immediately." Bennett and Caldwell turned in surprise, unused to hearing such urgency in their captain's voice. Morgan rushed forward, his face pale and sweating. "Remove those handcuffs now. Do you have any idea who this is?" Bennett scoffed, maintaining his grip on Gabrielle's arm. "She's just another perp trying to avoid booking cap. Claims she's some kind of general." Morgan pushed between them, physically separating Bennett from Gabrielle. "She is a general, you idiot. Lieutenant General Washington, I apologize profusely for this misunderstanding." He fumbled with the handcuff keys that Bennett reluctantly surrendered. "Officer Bennett, Officer Caldwell, you are both suspended effective immediately. Turn in your badges and weapons." Bennett's face contorted with disbelief. "What? You're taking her side without even hearing our report. This is bullshit." Caldwell joined in, his voice rising. "We caught her running a stop sign in a suspicious neighborhood. We were just following procedure." The booking area erupted into chaos as other officers gathered, some supporting Morgan's orders while others sided with Bennett and Caldwell. Throughout the commotion, Gabrielle stood perfectly still, observing the disarray with the calculated assessment of a battlefield commander. As Morgan finally removed her handcuffs, she rotated her wrists, slowly restoring circulation. "Thank you, Captain," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "I would like my personal belongings returned immediately, and I will need access to a secure phone line." Morgan nodded frantically, shouting for an officer to retrieve Gabrielle's possessions. Bennett and Caldwell remained defiant, refusing to surrender their badges. "This is political correctness gone mad," Bennett snarled. "You're bowing to pressure because she's black and female." Gabrielle turned to face them, and something in her expression made both officers fall silent. "Officers Bennett and Caldwell," she began, her voice quiet but penetrating. "In the past hour, you have violated the Fourth Amendment by conducting an illegal search of my vehicle. You have violated federal law by detaining a military officer without cause. You have ignored direct orders from your superiors. You have made explicitly racist remarks that were recorded by your body cameras and patrol car systems. And most significantly, you have interfered with a military official with strategic oversight responsibilities, which under certain circumstances could be considered an act of treason." The room had gone completely silent as she spoke, every officer frozen in place by the methodical precision of her assessment. Each of these violations carries significant penalties, including federal charges that would be prosecuted by the Department of Justice, not your local district attorney. The front doors of the station burst open as Colonel Jenkins and 4 military police officers entered their uniforms and bearing instantly commanding attention. Jenkins spotted Gabrielle and moved directly toward her, the military police forming a protective formation around them. "Lieutenant General Washington," Jenkins said with a crisp salute. "Are you injured, ma'am?" Gabrielle returned the salute. "I'm fine, Colonel. Thank you for your prompt response." Outside, the sound of helicopter rotors became audible as the Blackhawks landed in the police station parking lot. Through the windows, camera lights from local news vans could be seen arriving, their reporters rushing toward the building. Bennett and Caldwell, suddenly aware of the magnitude of their situation, exchanged panicked glances. "The body cam footage," Bennett muttered. "We need to delete it." Caldwell nodded, reaching for his equipment, but a Pentagon cybersecurity specialist who had arrived with Jenkins intercepted them. "That won't be possible, officers," the specialist informed them coolly. The moment General Washington's emergency beacon was activated, all recording devices within a certain radius began uploading directly to secure Pentagon servers. Everything has already been preserved as evidence. Morgan, attempting to salvage the increasingly disastrous situation, offered Gabrielle his office for privacy. "General Washington, please use my phone for any calls you need to make. We are at your disposal." Gabrielle nodded her acceptance and followed Morgan with Jenkins and 2 military police officers accompanying her. As they entered the office, Morgan hurriedly cleared his desk, apologizing repeatedly for the incident. Gabrielle seated herself in Morgan's chair and picked up the phone, dialing a secure number from memory. The room fell silent as the call connected. "This is Lieutenant General Washington," she stated clearly. "Connect me to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, please." Every person in the room stood at attention as Gabrielle began briefing the highest-ranking military officer in the United States, her voice steady and professional as she detailed the events of the past hour. Through the glass windows of Morgan's office, Bennett and Caldwell watched the full weight of their actions finally beginning to register on their stunned faces. Do you believe the officers deserve to lose their jobs for what they did to Lieutenant General Washington? Comment number 1, if you think their punishment was justified, or number 2, if you think it was too harsh. Hit that like button if you believe accountability is essential in our law enforcement system, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. What do you think will happen when the media gets hold of this story? Will the public support General Washington, or will some try to defend the officer's actions? Let's find out as our story continues. By sunrise the following morning, the body camera footage had leaked to every major news network in the country. Americans awoke to split-screen images dominating their television screens on one side. Lieutenant General Gabrielle Washington in handcuffs being pressed against a police car. On the other, the same woman resplendent in her dress uniform, 3 stars gleaming on her shoulders as she received the Distinguished Service Medal from the President at the White House just 6 months earlier. The juxtaposition was jarring and instantly ignited a firestorm of public reaction. CNN ran with the headline, 3 stars to steel bars, General racially profiled in hometown. Fox News took a different angle. Military leader claims racial targeting after traffic stop. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags like #I stand with Washington and #respect the uniform. The raw footage from the officers' body cameras and patrol car showing their explicitly racist comments and deliberate disregard for protocol left little room for interpretation. By mid-morning, Gabrielle had been summoned back to Washington, D.C. for an emergency briefing at the White House. As her military transport landed at Andrews Air Force Base, a presidential motorcade awaited to escort her directly to the Oval Office. The president himself met her at the door, an unprecedented gesture that photographers eagerly captured. General Washington, whoa, the president said, his hand extended and his expression grave. On behalf of the United States government, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced. It was unacceptable and un-American. The meeting lasted 45 minutes, after which the president held a brief press conference in the Rose Garden with Gabrielle standing at his side. What happened to Lieutenant General Washington reflects a troubling reality that too many Americans face, the president stated firmly. No uniform, no rank, no service to this country should be necessary for any citizen to be treated with basic dignity and respect. But the fact that even a 3-star general can be subject to such treatment demonstrates how deeply rooted these problems are in our society. Back in Charleston, the city had become ground zero for renewed protests against police brutality and racial profiling. Hundreds gathered outside the police station where Gabrielle had been detained, holding signs with her image and quotes from her military commendations. Counter-protesters also appeared supporting officers Bennett and Caldwell, who had quickly become cause célèbre for certain conservative media outlets. Bennett and Caldwell themselves had been suspended without pay pending an internal investigation, but they were far from silent. They had hired a media-savvy attorney who arranged interviews with sympathetic hosts. "We were just doing our job," Bennett insisted during a primetime cable news appearance. In today's environment, police officers are afraid to enforce the law because everything gets twisted into a racial issue. Caldwell nodded alongside him. "We had no way of knowing who she was. She was combative from the start, questioning our authority. If she had just complied without an attitude, none of this would have happened." Their narratives began to crumble, however, as journalists dug into their service records. Multiple complaints of racial profiling and excessive force had been filed against both officers over the years, all of which had been dismissed or buried by internal reviews. Former colleagues came forward with stories of racist comments and targeted harassment of black residents. A particularly damning video emerged from 2 years earlier showing Bennett roughly arresting a black Air Force captain who had been pulled over for a broken taillight. The captain had been in uniform at the time. Social media investigators uncovered similar incidents across Charleston involving other black military personnel. A pattern emerged of service members being pulled over in certain neighborhoods, particularly when driving nice cars or wearing civilian clothes. The Pentagon, now fully engaged, launched a formal investigation into systemic discrimination against military personnel of color. Defense Department spokespersons announced that Secretary of Defense Robert Chambers had directed a comprehensive review of how military members were treated by civilian law enforcement nationwide. Behind the public face she presented to the media, Gabrielle struggled with the personal impact of the incident. In her Georgetown apartment, she sat alone, watching the news coverage, a glass of bourbon in her hand. The composed exterior she maintained for the cameras masked the deep anger and hurt she felt. This wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination, but it was perhaps the most blatant. Throughout her 30-year military career, she had encountered countless microaggressions, passed over for promotions that went to less qualified white male colleagues, and had her authority questioned at every level. She had weathered it all with the stoic resilience expected of a military officer, rarely allowing herself to acknowledge the emotional toll. But being handcuffed and humiliated in the neighborhood where she grew up had cracked something in her carefully maintained armor. A FaceTime call from her mother interrupted her thoughts. "Baby, are you okay?" her mother asked, her face lined with worry. "I'm watching it all on the news. Those officers had no right to treat you that way." Gabrielle forced a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Mama. Don't worry about me. How are you feeling? Is Aunt Vivian staying with you like we discussed?" Her mother waved off the question. "Never mind about me. I'm more worried about you. The phone's been ringing off the hook with reporters wanting statements from your family, and some of those calls haven't been so nice, if you know what I mean." Gabrielle's expression hardened. "You're getting threats. Since when?" Her mother sighed. "Since your face has been all over the news. Some folks around here don't take kindly to one of our own making waves. But don't you worry, Reverend Mitchell has organized some of the young men from the church to keep an eye on the house." The revelation that her family was experiencing harassment added a new dimension to Gabrielle's concerns. It was one thing for her to face the consequences of standing up for herself, but her ailing mother should not have to bear that burden. As if reading her thoughts, her mother straightened in her chair. "Now you listen to me, Gabrielle Marie Washington. Don't you dare feel guilty about this. You didn't do anything wrong. Those officers did, and if anyone should be ashamed, it's them and the people defending them." After ending the call with her mother, Gabrielle received another from the Pentagon. The Department of Justice had announced a civil rights investigation into the Charleston Police Department. Additionally, the police union had released a statement defending Bennett and Caldwell, establishing a legal defense fund for them. The situation was escalating beyond a single incident into a larger national conversation about race authority and justice. Public opinion was sharply divided along predictable lines. Liberal commentators pointed to the incident as clear evidence of systemic racism, while conservative voices suggested Washington was receiving special treatment because of her rank and that the officers were being scapegoated. Death threats began pouring into Washington's office at the Pentagon, necessitating increased security measures. Her daily routines had to be altered, her movements monitored by military protection details. The very freedoms she had spent her career defending were now restricted in her own life. As she prepared for bed that night, Gabrielle made a decision. Rather than allowing others to control the narrative or retreating from the public eye, she would take charge of the situation. She drafted an email to the Secretary of Defense, volunteering to personally lead the Pentagon's investigation into discrimination against military personnel of color. It was a bold move that would likely draw criticism and claims of bias, but Gabrielle had spent her entire career navigating treacherous political waters. She understood that her unique position at this moment in history provided an opportunity to effect real change. Several senior officials cautioned against her involvement, suggesting it might be better to let things calm down and citing vague national security concerns. Gabrielle recognized these for what they were: attempts to silence her and maintain the status quo. She had faced such resistance before, each time she broke another barrier or shattered another glass ceiling. This time would be no different. She pressed send on the email, knowing that her decision would set her on a collision course with powerful interests both inside and outside the military. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her phone buzzed with a text message from Colonel Jenkins in Charleston. "More cases coming forward. This goes deeper than we thought. We need your leadership on this, General." Gabrielle stared at the ceiling in the darkness, mentally preparing for the battle ahead. This fight would not be waged with conventional weapons, but would require every ounce of her strategic training, political acumen, and personal courage. The next morning, she would begin assembling her team. Gabrielle wasted no time establishing her investigative task force, selecting a diverse team of military and civilian experts with backgrounds in civil rights law, data analysis, and law enforcement practices. They set up operations in a secure conference room at the Pentagon walls, quickly covered with maps, timelines, and photographs. "Our mission is clear," Gabrielle addressed the assembled team on their first day. "We will investigate patterns of discrimination against military personnel of color in civilian law enforcement encounters. This is not about a single incident in Charleston. My experience suggests a systemic problem that potentially undermines military readiness and morale." The team began by creating a confidential reporting system for service members to share their experiences. Within 24 hours, they had received over 200 submissions from active duty and retired personnel across all branches of the military. Army Captain Marcus Jackson described being pulled from his car at gunpoint while driving home to visit family in Georgia. Navy Lieutenant Tasha Rodriguez detailed how police officers refused to believe her military ID was authentic. Air Force Technical Sergeant William Booker submitted dashboard camera footage of an officer telling him that wearing that uniform doesn't make you special around here, boy. The sheer volume of reports confirmed Gabrielle's suspicions, but the geographic clustering revealed something more disturbing. Cases were concentrated in specific jurisdictions across multiple states, suggesting localized policies rather than random incidents. Data analyst Major Priya Sharma noticed the pattern first. "General, look at this distribution, Joa," she said, pointing to clusters on the digital map. "These hotspots correlate almost perfectly with departments that use a particular police training program." And further investigation revealed a controversial training module titled "Identifying Security Threats in High-Value Communities," offered by a private company called Patriot Shield Consulting. The program's materials, obtained through a military contact who had attended the training, included profiles of suspicious individuals that used coded language to target minorities, particularly those driving luxury vehicles or appearing out of place in affluent neighborhoods. Gabrielle's team discovered that both officers Bennett and Caldwell had attended Patriot Shield training sessions within the past year. The company's founder and lead trainer was retired Colonel Maxwell Sherman, a former military police commander who had been forced into early retirement after multiple complaints about his discriminatory practices. Sherman's training materials never explicitly mentioned race, using instead phrases like cultural incompatibility and community cohesion threats. The investigation hit a wall when attempting to access complete records of which departments had contracted with Patriot Shield. The company claimed proprietary protection, and sympathetic judges had blocked subpoenas. Gabrielle needed another approach. She directed her team to analyze online forums and social media groups used by law enforcement officers. Tech Sergeant Kevin Wong, a cybersecurity specialist, uncovered a private Facebook group where officers from dozens of departments shared content that ranged from unprofessional to explicitly racist. Bennett and Caldwell were both members, along with hundreds of officers nationwide. The group included discussion threads about targeting military minorities who think their uniform puts them above the law. As the investigation progressed, Gabrielle began receiving calls from other high-ranking officers of color who had experienced similar treatment but never reported it. Brigadier General Nathan Williams described being detained by police while jogging in his own neighborhood. Rear Admiral Teresa Chen shared how officers had questioned the authenticity of her military ID during a routine traffic stop. These senior officers had remained silent, fearing career repercussions or being labeled as playing the race card. Their stories painted a disturbing picture of how even the highest levels of military achievement provided no shield against racial profiling. The investigation was not without resistance. Several generals from the old guard suggested Gabrielle was making the military look bad by airing these issues publicly. One particularly vocal critic, General William Harrison, chairman of the Joint Personnel Committee, called her directly. "Washington, you're turning this into a spectacle," Harrison said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone used to deference. "These isolated incidents don't reflect a pattern. You're damaging morale and recruitment by suggesting otherwise." Gabrielle remained professional but firm. With respect, General Harrison, the evidence suggests these are not isolated incidents. They represent a systematic pattern that affects our personnel and potentially our readiness. "I believe addressing this openly strengthens the military by ensuring all our people are treated with the respect their service deserves." Harrison's tone turned cold. "You're letting your personal experience cloud your judgment. The Secretary of Defense will be hearing my concerns about the direction of this investigation." After hanging up, Gabrielle received an anonymous email through her military account. "Back off, or your next promotion review will reflect your poor judgment and divisive actions." She forwarded the email to her security team without comment. Such threats were not new to her, but they reinforced her determination to continue the investigation. While the military opposition was concerning the investigation faced greater challenges from civilian law enforcement. Police unions across the country released statements questioning the Pentagon's authority to investigate civilian policing practices. Several departments refused to cooperate, citing jurisdictional boundaries. The investigation pushed forward nevertheless, expanding to examine the military's own handling of discrimination complaints. Gabrielle's team discovered dozens of formally filed complaints by service members regarding civilian law enforcement encounters that had been buried or dismissed without proper investigation. Many of these complaints included corroborating evidence like video recordings or witness statements that had never been reviewed. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of Bennett and Caldwell's electronic devices revealed disturbing connections. They were part of a network of officers across 5 states who regularly communicated about targeting black service members. Their text messages contained explicit references to humbling black military personnel who they felt were too proud or didn't know their place. One particularly damning exchange discussed how to provoke black officers into responses that could justify escalation and arrest. Evidence suggested this wasn't merely personal racism, but a deliberate campaign to undermine the authority and status of black service members. As these findings came to light, Gabrielle received a summons to testify before the House Armed Services Committee about her investigation and personal experience. The hearing was contentious from the start, with representatives dividing along partisan lines. Supportive members asked about her findings and the impact of discrimination on military readiness. Opposition members questioned her objectivity and the use of military resources for what they characterized as a political witch hunt. Representative Thomas Miller, a former police officer, was particularly hostile. "General Washington, isn't it true that you're using this unfortunate misunderstanding to advance a political agenda against law enforcement?" he challenged. Gabrielle remained poised. "Congressman, I have no political agenda. My only concern is the welfare and fair treatment of the men and women who serve this country. When service members of color face systematic discrimination that undermines their dignity and potentially their safety, that is a military readiness issue, not a political one. The hearing was interrupted by breaking news. A video had emerged showing Officer Bennett at a police association event 3 months before Gabrielle's arrest. In the video, Bennett could be heard bragging about how he and other officers regularly stopped entitled minorities in uniform to remind them that their rank doesn't mean anything on our streets. The video immediately went viral, undercutting claims that Gabrielle's case was an isolated incident or misunderstanding. After the hearing, Gabrielle's financial investigation team made another breakthrough. They uncovered financial connections between Patriot Shield Consulting, several police union leaders, and organizations classified as hate groups by the FBI. The money trail revealed that Patriot Shield had received funding from private donors specifically to develop training programs that would maintain traditional community standards, a phrase that appeared repeatedly in white supremacist literature. As these connections came to light, Gabrielle received an urgent request for a classified intelligence briefing. In a secure room deep within the Pentagon, intelligence officials presented evidence suggesting that the pattern of harassment against minority service members might be part of a coordinated effort to undermine military cohesion and readiness. Intercepted communications between known extremist groups discussed targeting military personnel of color as a way to sow division and reduce combat effectiveness. The intelligence suggested that what had appeared to be isolated incidents of racism might actually be part of a more sinister attempt to weaken American military power from within. Gabrielle left the briefing with a heightened sense of urgency. What had begun as an investigation into her personal experience had unveiled something far more dangerous, a potential threat to national security disguised as routine police encounters. She immediately upgraded the priority of the investigation and expanded her team's authority. As she walked back to her office, her phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Jenkins in Charleston. "General, we found something. You need to see this immediately." Attached was a photograph of an internal police bulletin titled Operation Community Integrity, with Gabrielle's mother's neighborhood circled in red. The document was dated 3 weeks before her visit and included instructions to monitor out-of-place visitors in the area. The targeting had not been random. They had been watching for her specifically. The weight of the investigation began taking a visible toll on Gabrielle. Dark circles formed under her eyes from sleepless nights reviewing case files and preparing reports. Her normally immaculate uniform showed small signs of neglect, a button slightly loose, a crease not quite perfect. Colleagues at the Pentagon noticed her arriving earlier and leaving later, sometimes spending entire nights in her office. The physical strain was matched by psychological pressure. She experienced flashbacks to the arrest, waking in cold sweats with the phantom sensation of handcuffs biting into her wrists. The memories blended with earlier experiences of discrimination throughout her career, creating a tapestry of pain she had never fully processed. Most concerning was her mother's deteriorating health. The stress of the public attention and harassment had exacerbated her existing heart condition. After a particularly alarming phone call with her Aunt Gabrielle requested emergency leave to return to Charleston. The military security team objected, citing credible threats against her in the area. "With respect, this is not open for discussion," Gabrielle stated firmly. "Arrange whatever security is necessary, but I am going to see my mother." The return to Charleston was markedly different from her previous visit. This time she traveled in an unmarked government vehicle with a security detail of plainclothes military personnel. The city that had once been simply home now felt like hostile territory. As they turned onto her mother's street, Gabrielle immediately noticed something wrong. The front yard of her childhood home was littered with debris, and crude graffiti defaced the front porch. "Stop the car," she ordered, her voice tight. The security team advised against it, but Gabrielle was already opening her door. She approached the house, slowly taking in the full extent of the vandalism. Spray-painted racial slurs covered the front door alongside threatening messages: "Race traitor," "Go back to Africa," and "Military diversity, its weakness." Despite her decades of military discipline, Gabrielle felt her hands trembling with rage. Inside, she found her mother sitting calmly in her favorite chair while her aunt attempted to clean paint from the windows. "Mama, why didn't you tell me about this?" Gabrielle demanded, kneeling beside her mother's chair. Eleanor Washington patted her daughter's hand gently. "And what would you have done, baby? Left your important work to come down here for some foolishness. These cowards only do this at night, when nobody's watching." Gabrielle called the local police to report the hate crime. Their response was tellingly sluggish. When officers finally arrived 2 hours later, they treated the incident as simple vandalism, despite the explicitly racial nature of the threats. "Probably just kids," the responding officer suggested with a shrug. "We've been getting a lot of these since you've been on the news." The officer's casual dismissal of the harassment ignited something in Gabrielle. She pulled out her phone, recording the officer's badge number and name. "Officer Daniels, I am formally requesting that this incident be investigated as a hate crime as clearly defined under federal statute. I am also requesting protection for this residence given the explicit threats. If the Charleston Police Department is unwilling or unable to provide appropriate response, I will be contacting the FBI to take jurisdiction." The mention of federal involvement changed the officer's demeanor instantly. While he made calls to his superiors, Gabrielle's phone rang. It was Reverend Michael Mitchell from her mother's church. "General Washington, I heard about what happened. The congregation is organizing a community watch. We'll have people keeping an eye on your mother's house around the clock." Gabrielle was deeply moved by the offer. "Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know." That evening, neighbors began gathering on the street, bringing food cleaning supplies and determination to protect one of their own. Young men took shifts watching the house, elderly women organized meal deliveries, and children created welcome signs to replace the hateful graffiti. As Gabrielle helped clean her mother's porch, a young woman approached, introducing herself as Aisha Thomas. "General Washington, I can't tell you what it means to see someone like you standing up like this. My brother is in the Army, and he's faced the same kind of treatment when he comes home on leave. Nobody ever believes him." Soon, others from the neighborhood shared similar stories. A retired Marine gunnery sergeant described being pulled over 11 times in 1 month without receiving a single ticket. A Navy nurse recounted being handcuffed during a traffic stop while in uniform. Each story reinforced what Gabrielle's investigation had discovered: a pattern of targeting that specifically aimed to humiliate military personnel of color. As the community gathering continued, a young black Army lieutenant in civilian clothes approached nervously. "General Washington, ma'am, could I speak with you privately?" The Lieutenant Eric Johnson had recently experienced a similar incident to Gabrielle's just 2 weeks earlier. "They held me at gunpoint, ma'am, said my military ID looked fake. I filed a complaint with my chain of command, but nothing happened. When I saw what happened to you, I thought maybe someone would finally listen." Johnson's story hit Gabrielle hard. Had she spoken out sooner about her own experiences throughout her career, could she have prevented others from suffering the same treatment? The question haunted her as she listened to Johnson's account. Later that night, as the neighborhood watch took their positions and her security detail established perimeters, Gabrielle sat with her mother in the living room. "I should have done more, Mama," she confessed. "All these years I kept my head down, played by their rules, told myself that success was the best revenge. But while I was climbing the ranks, people like Lieutenant Johnson were still suffering." Eleanor took her daughter's hand. "Don't you put that on yourself. You fought the battles you could when you could. Now that you're fighting this one, that's all anyone can ask." The conversation was interrupted by a call from an unknown number. Gabrielle answered cautiously. "General Washington." "This is David Mitchell. We were married for 8 years." Her ex-husband's voice brought a complex wave of emotions. They had divorced 7 years earlier, after a seemingly perfect military marriage crumbled under mysterious pressures. "David, why are you calling now?" There was a long pause before he answered. "I saw what happened to you. It brought back a lot of memories, things I never told you." David revealed that their interracial marriage had been a factor in their deterioration. "I started getting anonymous threats, warnings about being with you. Then my promotion was mysteriously delayed. A superior took me aside and suggested my personal choices were affecting my career trajectory." He had never told her, not wanting to add to her burdens as she rose through the ranks facing her own challenges. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I let them drive us apart rather than fighting back. I've regretted it every day since." The revelation added another layer to Gabrielle's understanding of the systemic nature of the discrimination she was investigating. It wasn't just about police encounters, but extended into personal relationships and career advancement. The following morning brought more unwelcome news. Several of her Pentagon colleagues had begun distancing themselves, declining meetings, and removing themselves from joint projects. Her investigation was making her radioactive within certain military circles. The same afternoon, she received unexpected support from a group of retired generals and admirals who sent a joint letter backing her investigation. Many shared their own experiences with racism throughout their careers, stories they had never previously made public. While reading these accounts in her mother's kitchen, Gabrielle made a startling discovery. 2 of the generals mentioned having their promotions mysteriously blocked during the same period when her own advancement to full general had been delayed without explanation. She immediately contacted her team at the Pentagon, directing them to investigate whether promotion boards had been systematically influenced to limit the advancement of officers of color. That evening, Gabrielle attended services at her mother's church. Reverend Mitchell's sermon focused on moral courage and standing firm in the face of injustice. As the congregation sang, "We shall overcome," Gabrielle found herself weeping openly for the first time since the incident. The tears weren't from sadness, but from a profound sense of community and purpose. After the service, church members surrounded her with support and prayers. As Gabrielle prepared to return to Washington the next day, she made 2 critical decisions. First, she would no longer allow the Pentagon to pressure her into producing a sanitized report that downplayed the extent of the problem. Second, she would go public with the full findings regardless of the political consequences. These decisions would likely cost her professionally, perhaps even end her career, but she had come to understand that her personal experience was part of a larger pattern that threatened both individual service members and military readiness as a whole. That night, she called her team in Washington. "Prepare the complete report unredacted. We're going to release everything we have." As she hung up, she felt a sense of peace despite knowing the storm that would follow. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between protecting your career and standing up for what's right? Comment number 1, if you've faced a similar moral dilemma, or number 2, if you've witnessed someone else's courage change a situation. Hit that like button if you believe speaking truth to power is essential for progress, and subscribe to see more stories of those who risk everything for justice. How far do you think this conspiracy against military personnel of color extends? Is it limited to a few police departments, or could it reach into the highest levels of power? Stay with us as Lieutenant General Washington uncovers the full extent of the plot against her and others. The Pentagon War Room had been converted into the investigation's Central Command Center walls, covered with photographs, timelines, and connection maps resembling a counterterrorism operation more than an internal review. Gabrielle stood before her assembled team, reviewing their latest findings. "What do we know about this Operation Humbling referenced in Officer Bennett's emails?" she asked, pointing to a highlighted message on the central display. Major Priya Sharma stepped forward with a tablet. We've identified 37 references to it across 6 police departments, General. It appears to be a coordinated effort specifically targeting high-ranking minorities in the military. The name itself is telling, suggesting the purpose is to humble those who've achieved positions of authority. Tech Sergeant Wong added, "We've traced the digital footprint back to a server registered to Patriot Shield Consulting, more specifically to retired Colonel Maxwell Sherman." The name triggered immediate recognition for Gabrielle. Sherman had been a notorious hardliner during his military career, openly opposing integration efforts and diversity initiatives. He'd been forced into retirement after multiple complaints, but instead of fading away, he had apparently built a second career training police departments. "Show me everything we have on Sherman," Gabrielle ordered. The team had compiled a comprehensive profile. After leaving the military, Sherman had established a police training company specializing in community threat assessment and maintaining neighborhood integrity. His client list included departments across 14 states, predominantly in areas with both affluent white neighborhoods and significant military installations. The training materials obtained through a whistleblower never explicitly mentioned race, but used coded language about cultural incompatibility and community standard enforcement. One module specifically focused on identifying individuals who use military or government status to avoid scrutiny. Financial records revealed Sherman's company received substantial funding from several political action committees with connections to white nationalist groups. Most troubling was a private training video where Sherman could be heard instructing officers on legally defensible ways to stop and search minorities. "Remember, you never mention race, sir," Sherman told the officers in the video. "It's always about suspicious behavior or furtive movements. Document everything in a way that covers you legally." Gabrielle's team had traced communications between Sherman and dozens of police departments, including direct contact with the Charleston PD leadership in the weeks before her detention. She decided to confront Sherman personally, traveling to his training facility in rural Georgia with a small team including Colonel Jenkins and 2 JAG officers. The compound, a converted farm with shooting ranges and tactical training areas, projected an image of paramilitary preparedness. Sherman received them in his office, a space decorated with military memorabilia and law enforcement shields from departments nationwide. At 67, Sherman remained physically imposing, his white hair cropped in a military cut, his posture ramrod straight as he rose from behind his desk. "General Washington," he acknowledged with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Susums. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Gabrielle maintained a professional demeanor despite her disgust. "Colonel Sherman, we're investigating a pattern of discriminatory practices against military personnel of color. Your name has appeared repeatedly in our inquiry." Sherman gestured for them to sit, his manner superficially courteous. "I train officers to protect their communities from all threats. There's nothing discriminatory about maintaining order and safety." The conversation that followed was a carefully choreographed exchange with Sherman, avoiding direct answers, while Gabrielle methodically presented evidence linking him to coordinated harassment of minority service members. As the confrontation continued, Sherman's composure gradually eroded. "You people are never satisfied, are you?" he finally snapped after Gabrielle presented evidence of his direct communication with Officers Bennett and Caldwell. "Given everything, handed promotions and positions beyond your capabilities, and still crying discrimination at every turn." Gabrielle remained calm, recognizing the outburst as tactical progress. "This isn't about promotions, Colonel. This is about American service members being targeted because of their race while serving their country." Sherman's face flushed with anger. The military was the last true meritocracy until political correctness infected it. Now we're weakening our fighting force to satisfy diversity quotas. As Sherman's frustration grew, he made a critical error referencing specific departments involved in what he called the initiative without being prompted. Ask yourself why departments from Charleston to San Diego have seen the need for these measures, he challenged. It's because they're on the front lines watching standards collapse as unqualified minorities are elevated beyond their capabilities. Gabrielle exchanged glances with the JAG officers who subtly nodded confirmation that they were documenting every word. She pressed further. And who else shares your concerns about these standards, Colonel? Surely you have supporters in current military leadership. The question was calculated to exploit Sherman's pride, and it worked. You think your stars protect you, but there are still real patriots at the highest levels who understand what's at stake. People who recognize that combat readiness matters more than diversity statistics. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Why do you think certain promotion boards have been so carefully managed? Why do you think your file was flagged twice before you finally got your third star? The revelation that her own promotion had been deliberately delayed was not entirely surprising, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold anger through Gabrielle. She maintained her professional facade, continuing to draw Sherman out until he had implicated several generals currently serving in key positions. As they prepared to leave, Sherman seemed to realize he had said too much. His manner shifted from combative to threatening. You're making a serious mistake, Washington. People with genuine concern for this country's security won't stand by while you undermine established order. The implied threat was clear, but Gabrielle simply thanked him for his time and departed with her team. In the government vehicle heading back to the airfield, Colonel Jenkins reviewed the recording. We've got him on multiple admissions, General, and he's implicated at least 3 current flag officers. Gabrielle nodded grimly. Focus on General William Harrison first. His position on the Joint Personnel Committee would give him direct influence over promotions. Back at the Pentagon, the investigation accelerated rapidly. Digital forensics experts traced communications between Sherman's organization and several serving generals, including encrypted messages with Harrison that contained lists of officers to be monitored or flagged during promotion reviews. Most damning was evidence that Sherman's company had been accessing personnel files of minority officers through unauthorized channels, including Gabrielle's own service record. The conspiracy appeared more extensive than initially suspected, targeting not just black officers, but all minority advancement in military and law enforcement. A whistleblower from Charleston PD came forward with information that officers Bennett and Caldwell had been specifically instructed to monitor Gabrielle's mother's neighborhood during the period of her visit. They had been given her vehicle description and likely travel dates, suggesting a level of advanced planning that went beyond random profiling. The investigation uncovered a training program called Recognition and Response that Sherman had developed specifically for communities near military bases. The program taught officers to be particularly vigilant about status claiming, described as minority individuals using military position to avoid normal police procedures. The evidence pointed to a psychological warfare approach designed to undermine unit cohesion by creating distrust between minority officers and their white counterparts. As the evidence mounted, federal law enforcement moved to arrest Sherman on charges of conspiracy against rights, a federal civil rights violation. When agents arrived at his compound, however, they discovered he had attempted to flee. Sherman was apprehended at a private airfield boarding a plane bound for a country without an extradition treaty with the United States. His electronic devices seized during the arrest contained detailed plans targeting specific high-ranking minority officers, including surveillance reports, travel patterns, and personal information about family members. In exchange for potential leniency, officers Bennett and Caldwell agreed to testify against the larger conspiracy. Their statements revealed that they had been recruited into the program during a training seminar led by Sherman, where they were told they would be part of an effort to restore proper order to military-civilian relations. Just as the investigation appeared to be reaching its conclusion, Gabrielle received an encrypted warning from an anonymous source within military intelligence. Harrison knows he's exposed. "Watch your back." The message was followed by evidence suggesting that General Harrison had accessed classified protocols for eliminating security threats. The implication was clear: Gabrielle's life might be in danger from within her own chain of command. Security around her was immediately enhanced, but Gabrielle refused to be sidelined. "If Harrison is willing to resort to threats, it means we're close to exposing everything," she told her team. "We accelerate, not retreat." The investigation had moved beyond issues of discrimination into potential treason, with evidence suggesting that the conspiracy had deliberately undermined military readiness by targeting key personnel based on race. As the full scope of Operation Humbling became clear, Gabrielle prepared to present her findings to the Secretary of Defense and ultimately to Congress, knowing that the revelation would shake the military establishment to its core. The conspiracy had reached into the highest ranks of military leadership, influenced promotion boards, manipulated assignments, and coordinated with civilian law enforcement to systematically undermine the advancement and authority of minority officers. What had begun with Gabrielle's humiliating detention on a Charleston street had unveiled a conspiracy that threatened the very principles of merit and equality upon which military effectiveness depended. The next phase would require confronting one of her own mentors, a man who had supposedly supported her career while secretly working to limit the advancement of officers who looked like her. As she reviewed the evidence against General Harrison one final time, Gabrielle steeled herself for the most difficult confrontation of her career. Gabrielle developed a meticulous strategy to confirm General Harrison's involvement before making formal accusations. She created 3 separate information packets with slightly different details about the investigation's progress, each traceable to one of her 3 primary suspects on the Joint Chiefs. The first went to General Harrison, containing unique information about a fictional witness willing to testify about Sherman's military connections. The second went to General Patricia Alvarez, including different but equally fabricated details about financial transactions. The third went to General Thomas Kruger, containing altered dates for upcoming arrests. All 3 packets were marked confidential and distributed through secure channels. Gabrielle then waited to see which false information would leak back to Sherman's associates. Meanwhile, public hearings on the scandal began in Congress. The House Armed Services Committee had convened special sessions to address the growing evidence of coordinated discrimination against military personnel of color. The hearings drew intense media coverage, with Gabrielle scheduled as the primary witness. On the morning of her testimony, the Capitol building's security perimeter extended for blocks, with both protesters and supporters gathering behind barricades. Inside the ornate hearing room, members of Congress from both parties positioned themselves for maximum political advantage. Those aligned with police unions and traditional military hierarchies prepared to challenge Gabrielle's findings, while others, ready to support military reform and civil rights protections, planned to amplify her testimony. Gabrielle entered wearing her full-dress uniform, ribbons, and medals attesting to her 30 years of distinguished service. The room fell silent as she walked to the witness table, arranged her materials, and took the oath. "Lieutenant General Washington," the committee chairman began, "you have uncovered what you describe as a systematic effort to undermine minority advancement in our armed forces. Please share your findings with the committee." With methodical precision, Gabrielle presented the evidence her team had gathered from the initial profiling incident in Charleston to the discovery of Operation Humbling and Sherman's training programs. She detailed how civilian police departments had been trained to specifically target minority service members with the goal of undermining their authority and creating psychological pressure. This was not random discrimination, Gabrielle explained, displaying charts showing the statistical improbability of the targeted patterns. This was a coordinated campaign designed to demoralize minority service members and impede their advancement. As questions from committee members began, Gabrielle's secure phone vibrated with an urgent message from her team at the Pentagon. The trap she had set had worked. Information unique to General Harrison's packet had appeared in encrypted communications to Sherman's associates confirming Harrison's involvement in the conspiracy. Before she could fully process this confirmation, the hearing was dramatically interrupted. The committee chairman received an urgent message which he announced to the room. "I've just been informed that Colonel Maxwell Sherman has been found dead in his cell. Preliminary reports suggest suicide, but the investigation is ongoing." A murmur ran through the hearing room. Gabrielle immediately recognized the timing was suspicious. Sherman's death came just as Harrison had been implicated, and before Sherman could testify about military involvement in the conspiracy. She requested a brief recess, stepping outside to contact her investigative team. The evidence suggested Sherman's apparent suicide might have been staged to silence him. His death bore hallmarks of a professional operation with security cameras experiencing technical difficulties during the crucial time period and the guard assigned to his cell being called away for an unscheduled meeting. Gabrielle returned to the hearing determined to reveal the full extent of the conspiracy, including Harrison's involvement. As she resumed her testimony, she methodically laid out the connections between Sherman Harrison and the systematic suppression of minority advancement in the military. Several committee members attempted to discredit her findings, suggesting she was allowing personal bias to influence her investigation. Gabrielle countered with documented evidence, including statistical analyses, witness testimonies, and digital communications that painted an undeniable picture of coordinated discrimination. After the hearing concluded, Gabrielle returned to the Pentagon to confront Harrison directly. She found him in his office, apparently expecting her visit. At 64, Harrison remained physically imposing, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his uniform immaculate. He had been Gabrielle's mentor early in her career, supporting her advancement and offering guidance at critical junctures. His betrayal felt particularly personal. "William C.," she said, using his first name deliberately as she closed his office door. "I know everything." Harrison maintained his composure, gesturing for her to sit. "Gabrielle, I've always respected your intelligence. That's why I supported your career, despite my reservations." She remained standing. "Despite your reservations about my race, you mean?" Harrison sighed, his expression suggesting he found the conversation tedious rather than damning. "This isn't about race. It's about standards, about maintaining the fighting effectiveness of the finest military in world history." Gabrielle had activated a recording device before entering his office, with Pentagon security monitoring the conversation remotely. She needed Harrison to incriminate himself clearly. So targeting minority officers for harassment by civilian police, blocking their promotions and undermining their authority, was about standards, she challenged. Harrison's facade began to crack. "You don't understand the bigger picture. The military was being transformed by social engineering rather than combat effectiveness. Promotion boards were being pressured to advance candidates to meet diversity goals rather than merit criteria." Gabrielle stepped closer. "I graduated top of my class at West Point. I served 3 combat tours. I have a Silver Star for valor under fire. Which of those accomplishments do you consider unmerited, General?" Harrison waved dismissively. "You're an exception, and you know it. That's why I supported you. But for every Gabrielle Washington, there are dozens of underqualified officers being advanced to satisfy political pressure." As Harrison continued justifying the conspiracy, he revealed critical details about its origins, scope, and participants. The operation had begun after diversity initiatives accelerated during the previous administration. Harrison and several like-minded generals had connected with Sherman to develop what they considered a correction mechanism to offset perceived lowering of standards. "The country's security was at stake," Harrison insisted. "We did what was necessary to maintain military readiness." Gabrielle methodically dismantled his arguments, citing studies showing increased effectiveness in diverse units and pointing out that the officers targeted by the conspiracy had service records equal to or better than their white counterparts. This wasn't about standards, William. This was about power, and who you believe deserves to hold it. As their confrontation escalated, Harrison realized Gabrielle was recording the conversation. He lunged for her phone, attempting to delete the evidence. "You self-righteous bitch." He snarled, his cultivated persona completely collapsing. "You have no idea the forces you're challenging." Before he could reach the device, Pentagon security officers entered the office. Harrison's access to classified systems had already been revoked, and his communications were being monitored. The security team escorted him from the building as Gabrielle watched her former mentor transformed into a desperate, angry man facing the end of his career and likely criminal charges. Simultaneously coordinated arrests took place across multiple states, with dozens of law enforcement and military personnel implicated in the conspiracy. The operation revealed connections to white nationalist groups, unauthorized surveillance of minority service members, and deliberate interference with military promotions and assignments. In the aftermath, Gabrielle faced both acclaim and intense backlash. She received death threats from those who viewed her as destroying military traditions, while others hailed her as a hero, exposing long-hidden injustice. The military establishment, forced to confront embedded racism within its highest ranks, initiated comprehensive reviews of promotion practices, command assignments, and relationships with civilian law enforcement. Harrison was scheduled to face a military tribunal on charges including conduct unbecoming an officer conspiracy and potentially sedition. His position on the Joint Chiefs was left vacant, with unofficial suggestions that Gabrielle might be the logical choice to fill it. When formally offered Harrison's position, Gabrielle initially declined. "I need to complete this investigation and ensure the reforms are implemented properly before considering any new assignment," she told the Secretary of Defense. The conspiracy had been exposed, but Gabrielle knew that dismantling the systemic problems it revealed would require sustained effort and institutional change. As she returned to her office after declining the Joint Chief's position, Gabrielle received intelligence that several conspirators remained at large, some potentially in positions to threaten ongoing reforms. The battle had been won, but the war against discrimination within the institutions, sworn to protect American values, continued. The final test would come in the civilian courts, where Bennett and Caldwell would face a jury of their peers for their role in the conspiracy, with Gabrielle scheduled as the primary witness against them. 6 months after Lieutenant General Washington's handcuffs were removed in the Charleston police station, officers Ryan Bennett and James Caldwell entered the federal courthouse for the commencement of their trial. The case had captured national attention, with media outlets framing it as either a long overdue reckoning with systemic racism or an example of political correctness run amok depending on their editorial stance. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution team from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division presented their opening statements detailing charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy against rights, and false imprisonment of a federal officer. The defense team positioned their clients as dedicated officers caught in political crossfire, victims of changing standards rather than perpetrators of discrimination. On the third day of proceedings, Gabrielle took the witness stand. She wore her full dress uniform, the 3 stars on her shoulders gleaming under the courtroom lights. As she raised her right hand to take the oath, her left hand still bore a faint mark where the handcuffs had cut into her wrist 6 months earlier. The prosecutor led her methodically through the events of that day in Charleston, her testimony precise and unembellished. When asked about her feelings during the incident, Gabrielle paused briefly. "I felt what many have felt in similar situations, a mixture of indignation, humiliation, and fear. But primarily, I felt disappointment that the uniform I have worn proudly for 30 years provided no protection against prejudice." During cross-examination, the defense attorney attempted to portray Gabrielle as combative during the traffic stop, suggesting she had escalated the situation by questioning the officer's authority. General Washington, isn't it true that you repeatedly challenged the officer's instructions rather than simply complying? Gabrielle maintained her composure. I respectfully asked why I was being detained, which is my constitutional right. I complied with all lawful orders while verbally noting my rights were being violated. At no point did I physically resist or behave aggressively. The defense strategy shifted to patriotism, attempting to position Bennett and Caldwell as protectors of American values. These officers were trained to be vigilant about security threats in their community, the attorney argued. They were serving their country just as you serve yours, General. Gabrielle's response was measured but firm. Protecting communities requires respecting the rights of all citizens. Selective enforcement based on race undermines rather than enhances security. And let me be clear, handcuffing a military officer without cause does not serve this country's interests. As the trial progressed, additional victims testified about similar experiences, creating a damning pattern that supported the prosecution's conspiracy charges. Former colleagues of Bennett and Caldwell revealed their history of targeting minority motorists, particularly those with military connections. The most devastating testimony came from a former police academy classmate who produced text messages showing Bennett specifically watching for Gabrielle's vehicle after learning of her mother's residence in their patrol area. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. Their deliberation lasted just 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts for both officers. The courtroom remained silent as the verdicts were read. Bennett and Caldwell standing stone-faced between their attorneys. When the judge scheduled sentencing for the following week, the former officers were immediately taken into custody, their bail revoked due to the severity of the convictions. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Vanessa Robinson herself, a black female veteran who had served as a JAG officer before her judicial appointment, delivered a scathing assessment of the defendants' actions. This court finds particularly troubling the deliberate targeting of military personnel based on their race, Judge Robinson stated. When those sworn to uphold the law instead use it as a weapon against citizens who have dedicated their lives to defending this nation, the damage extends beyond individual victims to undermine the very principles both institutions are meant to protect. Bennett and Caldwell received the maximum sentences for their crimes, 10 years in federal prison, without possibility of parole for 2 years. As they were led from the courtroom, Gabrielle made eye contact with Bennett. His expression had changed from defiance to something resembling recognition, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of his actions. Concurrent with the civilian trial, General William Harrison faced his own reckoning before a military tribunal. The proceedings, less public but equally rigorous, examined his role in coordinating discrimination against minority service members. The evidence Gabrielle had gathered proved devastating to Harrison's defense. Electronic communications testimony from subordinates and financial records created an undeniable picture of systematic abuse of power. The tribunal found Harrison guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer conspiracy and actions prejudicial to good order and discipline. He was stripped of his rank, dishonorably discharged, and sentenced to 15 years in military prison. His formal degradation ceremony, where the stars were removed from his uniform, was attended by several generals of color whose careers he had attempted to obstruct. With the legal proceedings concluded, Gabrielle turned her attention to institutional reform. She implemented new reporting mechanisms allowing service members to document civilian law enforcement encounters that appeared discriminatory. These reports were reviewed by a diverse panel rather than disappearing into administrative black holes as they had previously. The President signed an executive order creating independent oversight of interactions between police departments and military personnel with particular attention to potential patterns of discrimination. Police departments nationwide were required to implement new training protocols specifically addressing interactions with service members of color. After significant reflection, Gabrielle reconsidered her earlier decision and accepted promotion to full general and appointment to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, filling the position left vacant by Harrison's removal. At her promotion ceremony, she chose her mother to pin the 4th star to her shoulder, a powerful symbol of how far she had come from the handcuffed humiliation on a Charleston street. Eleanor Washington, her health improved with the reduction in stress, beamed with pride as she carefully attached the star, her hand steady despite her age. "I always knew you were destined for greatness," she whispered to her daughter. In addition to her official duties, Gabrielle established the Military Equality Foundation, supporting service members facing discrimination and providing legal assistance for those with valid claims against civilian authorities. The foundation quickly became a powerful advocate for change, with retired military leaders of all backgrounds joining its advisory board. The Charleston Police Department, under federal consent decree, following the investigation, underwent comprehensive restructuring. New leadership implemented mandatory training on implicit bias, constitutional rights, and appropriate interaction with military personnel. Officers with histories of discriminatory behavior were removed, and community oversight boards were established with significant representation from minority neighborhoods. During this period of transformation, Gabrielle returned to Charleston to personally thank the community that had protected her mother during the crisis. At a ceremony at her childhood church, she presented civilian commendations to the neighborhood watch volunteers who had guarded her mother's home. "You demonstrated the true meaning of service and protection," she told them. "When official systems failed, you stepped forward to uphold the values those systems should represent." The following spring, Gabrielle delivered the commencement address at West Point, her alma mater. Standing before the graduating class, more diverse than any in the Academy's history, she shared her experience not as a victim, but as a case study in leadership under pressure. "You will face moments that test not just your tactical training, but your moral courage," she told the cadets. "Those moments define your service more than any battlefield victory. Remember that the oath you take is to the Constitution and its principles, not to any individual or ideology." In the year following the trials, military academies reported record applications from minority candidates, a phenomenon journalists dubbed the Washington effect. Young people who had previously seen military service as unwelcoming found new inspiration in Gabrielle's story of resilience and institutional change. The final scene of Gabrielle's journey took place at the newly established Civil Rights and Military Service Museum in Washington, D.C. The interactive exhibit documented the long, often painful history of minorities in American military service, from segregated units to modern leadership. In a glass case near the center of the main hall, the handcuffs used to detain Gabrielle were displayed alongside her uniform and general stars, with a plaque describing how a moment of injustice became a catalyst for transformation. As she toured the exhibit, Gabrielle was approached by a young black female cadet who asked for career advice. "Ma'am, what should I do if I face discrimination during my service?" the cadet asked earnestly. Gabrielle smiled and removed a small device from her pocket, a new generation of the emergency beacon she had activated during her detention. "This is now standard issue for all service members," she explained, handing it to the cadet. "It's called the Washington Protocol. If you're ever in a situation where your rights are being violated, this alerts your chain of command immediately." The cadet examined the device with reverence. "So we don't have to face these situations alone anymore." Gabrielle placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Never alone again. The system isn't perfect yet, but we've built mechanisms to ensure what happened to me and countless others doesn't continue unchallenged." As they walked through the museum, Gabrielle reflected on the long arc of her career, from a determined cadet to a general who had helped reshape the institution she served. The handcuffs that had once symbolized her humiliation now represented a turning point in military history. The incident that could have ended her career instead launched the most meaningful phase of her service, protecting not just the nation, but the principles that made it worth defending. What do you think about Lieutenant General Washington's journey from handcuffed officer to transformative leader? Has her story changed your perspective on how institutions can be reformed from within? Comment below with your thoughts on how one person's stand against injustice can create ripple effects throughout entire systems. If you found this story inspiring, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about individuals who turned personal adversity into positive change. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that speaking truth to power can transform not just individual lives, but entire institutions. Thank you for joining us on this journey from injustice to accountability, and remember that the fight for equality continues in our military, our law enforcement, and our society every single day. Lieutenant General Washington's story teaches us that true leadership means confronting injustice even when it's personally painful. Her experience demonstrates how discrimination persists regardless of rank achievement or service to country. The journey from handcuffed general to systemic reformer illustrates that individual courage can transform entrenched institutions when channeled strategically. Washington's methodical approach to uncovering the conspiracy shows that fighting discrimination requires evidence allies and unwavering determination. She understood that changing systems means working both inside and outside established channels, combining official investigations with community support and public awareness. Her initial restraint during the arrest, followed by calculated response afterward, demonstrates the power of strategic patience. Perhaps most importantly, Washington recognized that her personal humiliation could become a catalyst for broader change affecting countless others facing similar discrimination. By accepting her Joint Chief's position rather than walking away, she embodied the principle that reforming flawed institutions often requires working within them. Her story reminds us that accountability doesn't just punish wrongdoing, it creates space for institutional healing and improvement. When she established the Washington Protocol, she ensured that future service members would have protection she lacked, transforming personal trauma into lasting change, the ultimate test of leadership. Has there been a moment in your life when you witnessed or experienced discrimination that made you question your faith in our institutions? What did you do in that moment? Comment below and share your story. Your experience might inspire others facing similar challenges. If Lieutenant General Washington's courage in standing up against systemic racism moved you, please hit that like button to help this important story reach more viewers. The fight against discrimination requires all of us to recognize and confront injustice when we see it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience and transformation in the face of prejudice. Together, we can build awareness about how racism operates in our systems and celebrate those brave enough to challenge it. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that one person's courageous stand can create ripples of change throughout entire institutions. Thank you for joining us in examining how accountability, persistence, and moral courage can transform our world. May we all find the strength to speak truth to power when facing injustice, just as Lieutenant General Washington did.